you so much for joining us. My name is Molly Gray. I'm pleased to serve as your Lieutenant Governor. And if you're joining us for the first time, this is our bi-weekly Seat at the Table event. We started in February, bringing folks together across Vermont, trying to create space virtually in my office in the State House to try to raise up the voices of Vermonters on the most critical issues facing our state. So today marks our 6th Seat at the Table. Again, thank you for joining us. A couple of things before I introduce today's topic and also our speakers. First, just a reminder that this is a recorded event, so it will be available on YouTube later. Second, we'd love for all of the representatives here today from towns, from economic development organizations, please feel welcome to put your first and last name, your affiliation or your contact information, anything you'd like in the chat. We'd love to make sure we know who's here. And then also to note that the way this is set up, the first half hour, we will hear from our incredible lineup of panelists, but the second half hour is really dedicated to answering your questions as attendees, also your comments. So please feel welcome to put those in the chat. Also, if you would like to be recognized, I'm happy to do that. We just kindly ask that you note that in the chat as well. So today's topic is downtown economic development and tax increment financing, or TIF districts, TIF programs across Vermont. I am particularly excited about this topic. One, because with a disclaimer, I know very little about it. I've been learning so much about it, and I suspect that many of the folks here today also have been learning about the possibilities and opportunities around tax increment financing and what it's meant for Vermont. So this is a learning opportunity. There are no silly questions. Ask away. We have an incredible lineup of panelists. But to frame the issue, I also want to frame Vermont's moment. As many of the folks here probably know, Vermont, through the American Rescue Plan, is set to receive about $1.35 billion. 197 million of that amount is really set for Vermont municipalities and for infrastructure projects. Additionally, President Biden, as many may know, has put forward the American Jobs Plan, which includes about 20,000 miles of funding for 20,000 miles of, 20,000 miles of highways, roads, and main streets. So there's a significant amount of funding in that proposal for main streets, also to modernize schools and childcare facilities. Simply put, Vermont has a lot of funding coming to our small but mighty state for our communities. And as a state that continues to struggle with a demographics crisis, and I'd say divides between rural Vermont and some of our bigger towns and cities, this is a really exciting moment. So I hope that that backdrop and information can kind of lead some of the conversation today. I'd now like to introduce our incredible list of panelists. Megan Sullivan, who serves as the Executive Director of the Vermont Economic Progress Council, which is within the Agency of Commerce and Community Development at the state of Vermont. Dominic, or Dom Cloud, who's the City Manager of the City of St. Albans. Lori Hirshfield, who's the Director of the Department of Planning and Development Services for the town of Hartford, Vermont. And Stephanie Clarke, who's Vice President of White and Burke Real Estate Advisors. So today we'll begin with Megan. Megan, thank you so much for joining us. I think the first question or the first topic we really need to address is, what are TIFs? How do they work? So can you sort of set the table for us? And again, thank you so much for joining us and for your time today.
Great. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor, for having me. What a great opportunity to talk to folks about the tax increment financing program in Vermont. Generally speaking, TIF is a tool that's used to finance improvements to public infrastructure. So think streets, sidewalks, brownfields, stormwater management systems, in order to develop or allow for private development in specific areas. And the use of the incremental revenues that come from that new development for repayment of debt service. So when we talk about TIF districts, it actually has two meanings. One is geographical, and you'll see with Dom and Lori here, talking about geographically their TIF district within either the city of St. Albans or in Hartford, that it's saying this is where the community is saying we want to have our development. This is where development is really critical for us. And the second is the financing tool. And the financing tool of TIF is that a community incurs debt, that money is used to build public infrastructure, which then drives private development, and the increase in the grand list is then used to repay that debt. So it sort of goes in a circle. And this is different because in incurring the debt, you are pledging your incremental revenues to repay that debt rather than raising tax rates to do that. Though it has to be noted that the municipality is on the hook if the increment doesn't eventually come in. But it can be a really transformational way for a community to have conversations about what does our downtown development want to look like in places where that conversation is stalled because you can't get past the how do we pay for it. You can talk about what do we want our community look like, and it also leverages a real private public partnership, because the private development has to come along in order for that repayment of debt. So it really forces that that relationship between the public sector saying we can build these public improvements, and that private development that says in order for us to build, we need to have those improvements in place. TIF is very different across the country. It varies greatly. In Vermont, TIF districts have to have state approval as well as municipal approval because of our statewide education funding. And so the use of statewide education fund increment, and that term increment is really important, means that the state wants to have more involvement in understanding what are the projects that you're talking about? What is the private development that is coming along? Is this going to be viable? Is it fiscally responsible? And do you need this tool in order for it to happen? So that's why the Vermont Economic Progress Council is involved, in order to help communities understand what that criteria is and to help monitor that the various rules and statutes are being followed in the process. And there's a lot of them, so we're there to help throughout the process to make sure that all of those rules are being followed. The process for creating a TIF district, as I mentioned, really starts at that local level with the community talking about what do we want to see for growth in our, whether it's a designated downtown or a village center, or if it's an industrial area that you want to create density in, but what is it that we want to see? And then developing a plan, a financing plan. How is the money going to come in to pay for this, as well as the broader plan of, we have 10 years in the Vermont TIF district to incur debt. What are the transformational type projects that we could see happen in those 10 years realistically? And you have 20 years to retain increment. So make those debt service payments. Then it goes to approval by the municipal legislative body, and then to the state to review criteria to make sure, yes, it meets the location criteria. Yes, it meets project criteria. And those are things like you're going to remediate brownfields, you're going to create affordable housing, there'll be transportation enhancements done. And if the state gives approval, then it goes to the voters to approve that first incurrence of debt and every incurrence of debt thereafter. So there's a lot of different opportunities to involve stakeholders, whether it's at that first local level all the way up to the state level. The TIF district program, as I said, is a 10-year program. So it's 10 years worth of projects, 10 years worth of or more of private developments. It is a complicated and intensive program, but it can be transformational. And I know there are some communities here to talk about their experience, but there are even more. I would highly recommend looking at our TIF annual report where we have district profiles that really go into how each district has been structured, the types of projects that they've done, and the outcomes that they've seen so far. We also have a proposal right now that is in at the House, in House Commerce, to create a new TIF program. And this is a project-based TIF program that would be aimed at more communities to be able to use, more rural communities who may not have 10 years worth of projects, may not have the staff capacity to create and administer a TIF district, but could do one project that could drive important private development in a rural area. We are hopeful that that will pass this year in order to have some equity in the use of the TIF tool across Vermont.
Thank you, Megan. A lot of terrific background information. I may ask if there's a place where folks here could go to access the annual report or any information just on the process that you just shared. If you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat, that would be great. And I think the bill that you're talking about is S33, which was introduced to the Senate and has now made it to the House. It's with the Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. I don't currently see anyone from that committee here, but if we do have a legislator here who wants to speak to that, please just note it in the chat and we'll get to that during the Q&A. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dominic Cloud, who is the city manager of St. Albans. And I just want to actually give a shout out to Dom before I turn it over to him, just to thank him, because this seat at the table was actually his idea. I had gone up and met with Dom and learned more about St. Albans' incredible story, which I'm hoping he will tell. But Dom, thank you again for this great idea and welcome. Really happy that we can make this happen.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'd like to touch on 3 philosophical shifts that are the foundation for all of this work, and then quickly highlight 4 deals where we practiced them. The first, and this is tough in Vermont, but the first is the recognition that economic development is a public good. That's a sizable shift, but economic development needs to be on par with drinking water, roads, education. It deserves public investment. That's a major philosophical shift, but once you do that, great things can happen. Second is that local government leaders have the tools to transform their economy. You can do so by participating directly in the development process. You buy the land, you invest in projects. That's what helps move your projects and your visions off of planning documents and into real projects. This document was published in 1981 in St. Albans, 1981. And most of our ideas came right out of here. And the biggest change is the philosophical shift. It's mostly about things that we have control over, how we think about projects and how we use the tools we have. The third is community vitality is judged by the condition of both the public and the private space. When you drive down Main Street with your family, whether you stop for lunch or get out to shop, it's not just about the sidewalks and whether there's a place to park in a parking garage. It's not just about the facade of the restaurant. It's about all of the above. And that responsibility is with our local elected leaders. You can't point at the private landowners and beat them up for not fixing up their buildings when they can't get any higher rent for doing so. They have a different obligation than we do as local leaders. But fortunately, as local leaders, we have the tools. We can walk down to the local bank and walk out with a check to buy that key piece of property when you need to. We can evaluate the returns, not just on a 5 to 7 year horizon, but on decades. And we can evaluate returns qualitatively and quantitatively. We can borrow cheaper than anybody else. We have access to the best information, and our returns can be much more pragmatic and practical. It's our place to step into the fold, and you don't have to be an expert. There's plenty of people who can help you do it. It's mostly about leadership. So here's a quick tour through some projects and how we did this. St. Albans House was our first project. By many measures, it should have been torn down. Historically, it was a classic railroad building that was everything from a brothel to a restaurant to a tattoo shop, right? Not uncommon in historic downtowns. It was on the grand list for $75,000. We met a local developer. I toured every developer I could find through it. None of them would touch it. I finally found a guy and said, we'll give you 50 grand. You fix up the outside of the building, we'll lend you 100 for 5 years. At 3%, don't pay us anything for 5 years. Today, it's on the grand list for $1.2 million. It's fully leased up. We got our 100 grand back. So we spent 50 to get a building worth $1.2 million.
Dom, sorry, I just want to interrupt you quickly.
Yeah.
Are you trying to share any images or just going to walk through the?
I'm just going to walk through it.
Okay, great, perfect, thanks.
Secondly, we did a project called Ace Hardware here locally. Ace Hardware was that spot in town where everybody goes. They were looking at moving out of town. They needed some new space. We found them space that worked. We assembled the parcels. We walked down to the local bank. We borrowed $1 million. We had it under site control. And then we went to the voters with a plan and said, we've got this parcel and here's what this local business wants to do to expand. Will you authorize $1.7 million for tax increment financing to cover that first $1.2 million and also pay for the brownfield cleanup? The developer contributed $500,000, which was what he would have had to spend in a greenfield, and we saved our department store, our hardware store. It passed 3-1 by the voters, 3-1. Then we did our downtown core project. There's a lot to this, but it consisted of a parking garage right in the heart of the downtown, streetscaping on all of the streets surrounding it. And we had a vision that if we participated directly in the process, we could attract a hotel and new office buildings. We didn't come up with that idea overnight. It was right in this thing. We've been talking about it since 1981. But what was different is that we were willing to step into the fold, take the risks, put skin in the game. So using tax increment financing, we spent $13 million. Today, we have Increment, which services the debt on that $13 million from that project of $25 million. That's a common relationship of 2-1. The $13 million is paid off in 20 years, but that $25 million is there for decades, darn near the whole life of the city. The fourth project we did is called Congress in Maine. It's right across the street from City Hall. It's located in the heart of the downtown. It consists of 3 buildings. A commercial building that fronts on Main Street that's 25,000 square feet, and 2 housing projects in back of 30 units each. One is workforce housing and market rate, the other is affordable. The parking is in the middle. The city bought all the land. We cleaned all the land. We brokered the deals with the developers, some nonprofit, some for-profit, that would lease the buildings. We spent $2.5 million in TIF. We spent another roughly 4 in other funds. And there's 10 million in Increment that is directly resulting from that project. So 2.5 million in TIF and 10 million in Increment that derives from it. But our biggest return here was not just the 10 million that we've added to the grand list, was the qualitative measure. Because the top 2 floors of this building, the middle floor is the Community College of Vermont, and the top floor is the Northwestern Medical Center. All of which are you know, both of which are the gold standard that what you want to have that keeps your downtown functioning, not just during the working hours, but also in the evenings and on the weekends. So in closing, TIF's the most powerful economic development tool out there. I like to sum it up. Remember that commercial from the 80s about this is your brain on drugs. Any questions? Well, this is your community on TIF, right? We've spent 20 million in TIF. It's generated 60 million in Increment. 20 and 60. Any questions? Thanks.
Thanks, Dom. Wow, and for everyone here, if you haven't been up to St. Albans to meet with Dom, I'm just going to say that you're willing to meet with just about anyone, and I gather you're willing to give a downtown tour. But I like what you said. You don't have to be an expert, but you have to be a leader and have a vision. And I think it's a real testament to St. Albans, your leadership, and folks have come together there with a lot of vision to really redevelop an incredible downtown. So thank you again. I'm very pleased now to introduce Lori from Hartford. Lori also has a TIF story to tell today. Lori, thanks so much for joining us. We're absolutely delighted you're here today, and we look forward to hearing what you've done in Hartford or helped lead in Hartford.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate it. Don gave a really good layout, and I'm just going to build on what he said in all of those elements and those four things that you really need to have. And I'm not going to go into them specifically, but I'm going to give them as examples within what we're seeing here. I'm just going to touch on a little bit of it because in 5 minutes, there's very little I can get. You can see from the map in front of you that we have a lot. It's a big district. It's 136 parcels. And I'm going to talk about 2 of them. But just to give you an overall, we're talking about a 13 million financing plan for doing the development for the public infrastructure. I will tell you now, as we are almost 10 years into the process as TIF, that it's not nearly enough to do everything that we need to do because things change, prices change, and also visions change. So that's just one piece of thing is to keep, it has to be fluid in the way that you approach it. And that's one of the things I would highly recommend being built into the district planning process. And it is. You just need to take advantage of it. So if we could start to really talk a little bit about how we got there. We did our revitalization plan as a community-wide effort, and we did that in 2008. And in 2011, we actually started our TIF district officially. Well, if you might have remembered what went on between 2008 and 2011, we had a housing crisis and the economy tanked. And that's when we came out with our program. So it took us a few years to get rolling. And that wasn't until 2014 because some of the developers that we had lined up to do improvements went away. And Prospect Street, and if we can flip to the next one, is one of those streets, areas that we did have first on our docket. We're ready to do it. And then we had the economy collapsed on us. So a new developer came in, and how you can see here is that this is an old industrial area. There is you can see from those buildings up there that, well, it didn't by the time we got to it. This was taken earlier on in 2008, 2009, but by the time we got to it, things had deteriorated. And you can see it's right next to Connecticut River. We have all of this stormwater unmanaged, dumping right into the river. It is an industrial site, so you have all of the chemicals and stuff that dealt with that, and it's very right next to the railroad lines. So we had a lot of issues going on with hazardous wastes that we needed to do cleanup. We needed to do proper stormwater management, and we needed to really create this as a gateway, because this is the first thing you see coming over the bridge from New Hampshire. We needed to create that gateway. And that's what we did. And back in our map there, it was that red area that you saw right there. And you can see that's right on the edge there. So looking at it, we had a developer that stepped in that actually was a property owner and developer. And what came out of that was a total reconstruction of a street, a fully functioning, well-drained street with sidewalk. You could see 2 of the buildings that were built there. There's a river walk there, and now also the road was pulled away from the river so that we didn't have all of that stuff pouring into it with erosion as well as not clean water. And what you see there now in the far end is a 38,600 square foot building that became the new home for the state offices that were located in another part of town, which is now being redeveloped. And that is one that has served us very, very well, because it really set the stage for how the rest of the site would develop. The second building is a 10,000 square foot building that was completed in 2016. And that is now home to the visiting nurses and hospice of Vermont and New Hampshire. And a third building is really the last lot that's closest to the road. You're seeing it as you're going down. And that is in the planning process. Our second site that I'd like to share with you is our Courier Street. If you can flip to that, you can see up at the top of that where you have the an old street. Actually, it's an old right-of-way that functioned like a driveway for over 100 years. Poorly graded. The road goes up into that area. You can see up into the hillside. That's all the right-of-way going around the corner. And then it comes out on the other end into our parking lot and served, you know, like I said, as a driveway for over 100 years. No proper drainage, no utilities that were properly sized for the kind of development we have today. Certainly no Wi-Fi and that kind of thing that functioned well. It was a catch as you can. And as you can see on the lower level, what we have there is the new 80 unit assisted living facility with memory care. And that is, you can just see the total transformation of the block in that area. And it basically creates a new block. You can't see it from these photos, but it does go around the corner, and we're just finishing up the work on that as it blends into our a parking lot that is also part of our TIF district that we're going to be redeveloping. I would show you a complete tour, but I only had 5 minutes, so I really wanted to get into that. I think the thing that it really shows for us is that these things really demonstrate to us the importance and the critical factor of that public-private partnership. Without that model, we would not have the successes that we have in our downtown. It's not possible for us, as Dominic had so clearly demonstrated, that this happens with one side or the other. We have to come together. We have to bring our development expertise from the public side and the private side together to create these beautiful opportunities and redevelopment. And that economic development can't sustain itself without this type of improvement. So one of the things I want to just share with you is I'm often asked if having the TIF district really makes a difference in stimulating that private investment. And some people feel like, oh, it would have happened anyway. Well, my experience is absolutely yes, it is a critical factor. By the town having the TIF district in place, it enables us to have the financial resources, as so clearly demonstrated earlier in this program, is to do the improvements necessary to attract the developers. And the developers see that there is a demonstrated commitment on the part of the town to make the necessary investments and take the necessary risks that go along with that, in putting in the public infrastructure that they need. They need it upgraded to today's standards. They need it in order to increase capacity. They need it in order to create a beautiful environment in which people want to come to their new development or their new businesses or their new housing units. And they see this demonstrated commitment, and they know that they're going to be supported. And so with that commitment, Hartford has been in a really great position to be able to build on an awareness and a reputation that gets out there into the public. And then those developers see that. They see the attraction of that. And then they come starting to knock at your door. I'm really, truly convinced, and Dominic may attest to this as well, that without that awareness of the commitment that the public is willing to make, they wouldn't even come talking to us in the first place, let alone starting to engage in a real serious dialogue about what it takes in order to create this vitality going forward. And just from that piece of the economic development, it's a critical factor that the vitality it has to continue. It can't just be a one-time thing and then everybody goes away in their own corners. So we're now bringing in new businesses that become an essential part of our downtown and keeping that vitality going forward way beyond the time period of when your TIF district expires. So I think I've used up my 5 minutes, and I'll let somebody else jump in.
Thanks, Lori. And I'm sorry, 5 minutes is never enough time, but we truly hope, as with all of our seat at the table events, that this is a first conversation of many to come. I really love what you said and acknowledged about it can't be one side or the other. It can't be the public or the private, that it really has to be the and the both, and just acknowledging sort of the awareness and commitment that the public financing brings to the development community. And with that, I would love to introduce, and now I will introduce Stephanie Clarke. And Stephanie has worked with a lot of different TIF investors and a lot of different communities, and is really the go-to in many ways on how the different pieces of these projects come together. So Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today. I'd love for you to sort of break down kind of what comes next and how this works for different parties or stakeholders coming to the table to get one of these projects off the ground.
Thank you. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. My name is Stephanie Clarke. I'm with White & Burke Real Estate Advisors, and I'm going to focus on evaluation and implementation when you're thinking about TIF, whether you are inside of a municipality as a select board member, inside a town hall, or whether you're a private entity, a investor or property owner. And my company has done TIF work around the state for over a decade. I've developed 4 of the districts in the state, including Dom and Lori are both my clients, and we are helpful when we can evaluate for a municipality the feasibility of doing a TIF district. We can evaluate the actual individual projects, and we've also done development of all different kinds with a lot of different funding sources. So I can firsthand attest to how difficult it is to do development in a downtown, especially, or in a growth area. This is a very specific type of development that is almost impossible without these forms of assistance. So to start with evaluation, I'm going to kind of borrow a model from Dom. I'm going to go 3 and 5. He went 3 and 4. I've got 3 things to evaluate, 5 key points to keep in mind. 3 things to evaluate. So whether you're on the inside of a municipality or you're looking at this from the private side, it's got to start with the private development. What is the driver? What is the demand? Is there a site that has been analyzed over and over and people want to make it work, but the numbers just didn't pencil out? Is there a business that's been trying to expand but has been hitting roadblocks over and over again? These are the ones to focus on. And then what's the infrastructure need? That's the second thing. What's the infrastructure need? What's the nexus to that? What's the cost? And then the third is linking the two and talking about scale. Is there one infrastructure project that unlocks multiple opportunities for redevelopment or parcels of land that become feasible to redevelop? Is it in a smaller community? Is it one major roadblock that needs to be eliminated for these projects to go forward? And some of that will then influence, for a municipality that doesn't have a district, this will impact how you decide to go forward, whether it's a full district or maybe project-based TIF if this legislation passes. And if you're within a district already, this is how you would evaluate. You start with the private side, look at the numbers, look at what it would generate, what is it going to, and then what is it going to cost to build that infrastructure. So I really think there are 5 key things to remember, though, if you're in a TIF project. So if you already have a TIF district, if you're either on the municipal side or the private side, it is a partnership. It's a public-private partnership. There's municipal money, there's taxpayer money involved. So the municipality has their obligation to the taxpayer, and the private side has their obligations as well. So they need timely cooperation and good faith. Number 2, it is a lot of process. That's just what it is. You know, good public investment requires process, time, and collaboration. Number 3, TIF is just one tool, usually in a project deal, one financing tool. So there's typically a capital stack, even on either on the private side or the public side, to get the deal done. So on the private side, they may have new market tax credits as well as historic tax credits. On the public side, they may have brownfield money or transportation dollars. And this is a good thing. You want all the parties you can possibly get to the table, but you have to realize that that's leveraging resources, and there are different stakeholders involved, and there are different boxes to be checked and requirements for each one. So to be eyes wide open about that going in. Number 4, it is really a program. TIF is a program that has some limits, and there is specifically the best limit we have, and it's a good limit, is that we do not have the Field of Dreams model. If you build it, they will come. Not going to happen here. You have to have development agreements in place. There has to be a sustainable financing plan in place. And lastly, as Dom discussed, it is an entrepreneurial deal-making tool. So this is an opportunity for a municipality to take the driver's seat. It is also comes with risk. And then you've got to have everybody in the boat. You've got to have everybody rowing in the same direction and being fully transparent and working in good faith to pull these deals off. And I will close with a plea to any legislators on the line and any constituents within TIF district, actually any constituents anywhere to your legislator, is about Bill S33. There's a specific element that we are trying to add. In last year, when pandemic struck, they extended TIF district. You heard others talk about this debt increment window of 10 years. They extended that by 1 year. Well, that clock is a ticking clock. And every year that development and investment doesn't happen is a year wasted of potential. And in the last year, we've seen that a year can go by very quickly. Our request to House Commerce has been to add a 3-year extension to Bill S33. South Burlington, Burlington, St. Albans, and Barre are all in support of this amendment. And we know that just the 1-year extension wasn't enough realistically. The federal government knows that. ARPA is allowing for funds to be spent through 2024 because they realize the length of the recovery that's going to be needed here. And the reason for that is that this is not just a simple recession. We are not just in a recession we've been through before. This is unprecedented. Beyond just the skyrocketing costs of labor and materials right now, it's also the fact that we've never before seen a recession that has changed the nature of the marketplace itself. What kind of offices are going to be needed? What kind of senior housing is going to be needed? We don't know yet. Investors are slowly starting to be more confident to make those decisions, but we have to make sure we're picking the right product, that investors are making the right investments into our communities before we make these public investments. So we have asked for a 3-year extension for existing TIF districts to incur debt, and this is in the Bill S33. So if you are already in a community with a TIF district, we ask that you talk to your legislator. Even if you're not, talk to your legislator, because we're hoping that this will go to the full vote. If you are a legislator, we please ask that you consider supporting that part of S33 and supporting S33 in general.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was terrific. And just to note again that when you were talking about the ARPA funds, that's the American Rescue Plan, and the money that I mentioned earlier that is expected to come to Vermont, and that there is that sort of 3-year period. We still don't know yet what even the limitations are on the funding, but it's a 3-year period. And I think, and we hear, my office hears time and time again, how do we recover stronger? What are the lessons learned from this pandemic? And we don't know yet what a lot of those lessons are, as you said, be it around senior housing or education, or even how we provide access to education, right? We could talk about broadband all day, which I know is not the focus of today's seat at the table. So with that, I'd love to actually bring in some of the folks who are here today. If there are any questions, please feel welcome to type them into the chat. Or if you'd like to say a few words, Hazel, my chief of staff, will recognize you. I know that there are representatives here from many, many, many different communities. Also, Ted Brady, I believe, is here from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. So thank you again so much for joining us. Maybe to get okay, I see one longer post here. I don't know if there is a question, but thank you, Robert, for your post. I will actually pose one question. Maybe this is for Dominic and Lori in particular. As Stephanie mentioned, sort of having the process function and bringing a lot of the community together to kind of agree on set projects or the direction of the investments seems really, really important. And you've both had a lot of success with that. Dom, I was just wondering if you could speak to what you did to sort of take that plan from 1981, breathe new life into it, and then bring the community together, which I suspect isn't always easy when there are different ideas at the table on what to do and how to spend the money.
Sure. Never waste a crisis. And we had a crisis that was primarily fiscal. St. Albans was on a trajectory that was not sustainable. Walmart was coming into a nearby community, was going to compete with our downtown, and we had a lot of pent-up demand, voters calling for action. We started small. We didn't start with $30 million real estate projects. We started with small projects that people could wrap their heads around, that benefited local people. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we, in order to get the hotel deal to happen, we needed to directly invest $1 million and join the LLC. We didn't start with that on day one. We started with projects where the risk was manageable, and the worst case scenario we could survive, and we built up some success, which ties into Stephanie's point about timelines as well, right? It's not until you're 7 or 8 years into it that you really realize what you're doing. And then, it's kind of like life, right? It's not until you're nearing the end that you realize what it's all about. So that's how we approached it.
Thank you. And Lori, any thoughts or reflections to add on sort of how you bring the community together?
Yeah,
either
so
at the beginning
we were
or
fortunate
after?
in that ours is White River Junction with a little bit of our historic White River Junction, our designated downtown. So we really built around the designated downtown revitalization plan. And we added onto it to encompass a little bit additional area across the White River to really bring it together. So we had a hardcore of already engaged downtown businesses that we had been working with for a number of years that took this on as their baby. And, Stephanie can attest to it. She was right there in front with us, making those presentations to the select board over and over again. We must have had, I don't know, at least a half a dozen or maybe even 8 community meetings, I think, in the whole of this process, and educating people and having them look at what are our opportunities and really pulling it together that way. And then we at the time that we became a district, we actually had to go to the voters to approve the entire $13 million project. So we started on a huge campaign with working with the Center for Cartoon Studies and doing some graphics for us. And we just started plastering it. We did interviews on CATV and started talking about what is this public and private partnership? How does it work? And we brought in an example that we had actually done years ago that basically was a TIF kind of project, like they're trying to get done right now through the TIF program, but it was before TIF was official as a big project for us. And we had gotten some state and federal funds to do redevelopment of the Railroad Row area. And the developer came in and said, well, you're going to get rid of those old horrible buildings and rebuild the road. Well, I think I'll invest. And so it was a tip. We brought in those developers, and they became our spokespersons, and then the people that ended up occupying those buildings. So again, it's really that engagement with the people that are going to make the change happen, and that's the businesses, that's the property owners, and we are there to be a partner in that and help facilitate it. And I will tell you that risk management is a key factor in all of this, because we were fortunate this year and we were able to get that 3-year extension, because we already had lost our 3 years when we first got out the gate, and the legislature did give us our 3 years last year to be extended. Otherwise, we would have sunsetted this year in March, and we would not have gotten everything done that we needed to get done in the middle of COVID as well. So I can't say enough about how critically important having that extra time is.
Thank you, Laura. I think you mentioned earlier fluidity is important, but it sounds like that flexibility is also important.
Yeah.
As projects develop. Stephanie, I may ask you to comment on Robert's question. Again, Robert said, TIFs are suitable tools for reclaiming brownfield properties in urban areas that has the geo-commercial assets to ensure economic success. Hartford is indeed a good example. However, there are significant downsides and risks. And then there is some information posted about the JFO, Joint Fiscal Office's January 2018 report. Do you want to provide some thoughts or reflections on that about just risk generally?
Sure, and if our other panelists want to jump in, that's fine. That's fine too. So this argument has been made by the JFO and by others who believe that there is a cost to the Ed Fund with this program. I fundamentally disagree with that. I think they're missing a key component here that I think the important piece is the but for. Megan talked about it at the beginning, but the point is, but for this tool, but for the investment by the municipality, the development would never have happened. And it could, or, you know, there's another part of it, which is it would never have happened, or it would have happened in a less desirable manner. And the less desirable manner can mean a lot of things. It can mean a smaller scale. It can also mean in places we're not focusing we don't want to focus our growth. So if we want them in our growth centers, which is the commitment of this state, we need to be investing in this and increasingly investing and incentivizing them in the downtowns. So the but for says that otherwise, without this money, these things would not have been created. So there's no cost to the ed fund because this is actually just gravy. And the last thing I will say is that, you know, this program specifically here in Vermont is run so tightly, and that's to Megan's credit, that's to the administration's credit, that's to the legislature's credit, to having established a program that holds municipalities accountable and works with municipalities, provides them resources to make sure that they have looked at how this will pencil out, to make sure we don't end up in scenarios that have happened nationally that have landed municipalities in hot water. And that is where there is some risk, but long term it's built so that there are safeguards, and you have to see this as a long-term investment of the education of the municipality in the education fund, because ultimately these properties land on the grand list and grow the education fund after 20 years when the window is closed, when the district is closed.
Thanks, Stephanie. And I may go over to Megan. Actually, Megan, do you have any reflections, thoughts from your work and sort of the criteria that you use to help manage risk and review projects?
Sure, absolutely. I think you know, Stephanie was right on in talking about how that but for is reviewed, and you know, I think what Dom showed earlier is a really good visual of a community's but for. That this was the 1981 plan for St. Albans. This was their priority. And I think in testimony for the project-based TIF S33, we have seen more and more communities showing us that, whether it's Westford showing a letter from 1990 saying our biggest priority, the thing we have to get done right now, is our wastewater. And now, over 40 years later, they're still saying that's our biggest priority to drive economic development. Or if it's Highgate saying our biggest priority, and we're going to put this on the cover of our annual report, is having industrial development at our airport. In 1970, still nothing has happened. That this type of development is hard, and it is not happening anyways. There needs to be as many tools in the toolboxes available, and it is an investment in the future of our education fund to develop our downtowns, our designated areas, our industrial centers in a smart growth way. I think that's another key part of this, is that Vermont's tool says TIF can't be used anywhere. You have to meet certain location criteria, and you have to meet project criteria that is in line with our smart growth priorities in the state. We want density, we want downtown development, and we want development to happen in our economically disadvantaged areas. Because when communities are faced with making these investments by themselves, and the increment that will come from that, without TIF, a large portion of the property tax goes to the state. So the state sees their priorities being met and gets a large portion of the benefit while the towns are paying the bill. There are a lot of other state programs that try and help through these processes, but TIF is an important one. I think in JFO's report, they had people saying none of it would have happened. They had people saying 100% would have happened, and they cut the baby in half and said, what if 50% happened? I'm not sure that method really reflects the reality that downtown development has. I think another piece of this is that 30% of the incremental revenues do go directly to the education fund. So that's considering that 30% of that development would have happened anyways. It's that belt and suspenders on the but for. So the original taxable value goes plus 30% of the increment, and the community has 70% of the education fund increment to work with, as well as 85% of the municipal increment. So municipalities are asked to put skin in the game. 85% of the municipal increment has to be put into the TIF fund with the other 70% in order to show that the community is just as engaged and committed in this development as the state is. So there are a lot of checks and balances that are in place in the application process. VEPC does monitoring twice annually to check in with the TIF districts, see how things are going. Annual reporting is required, and there are state audits that are required. So the state is really checking in and ensuring that projects are moving forward, districts are moving forward in the way that is set up forth in their plan. But if as Lori said, things change, communities can come back with a substantial change request that goes back and looks at the reasons that the community was initially approved. We do have 4 district designations available. There are a limit of 6 from Act 69. 2 spots have been taken, 4 are available, and then we're hoping that project-based TIF will be passed this year to allow for those smaller community single projects.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan. And I do want to ask sort of a closing question. But before I do, I may actually come back to you and just ask, for a lot of the folks here today who are listening, who are from smaller towns, who may not fit into one of those larger designations, is the project-based TIF sort of the best hope? Or from where you're sitting in this sort of moment where we have a lot of money potentially coming to Vermont, a lot of room to be really strategic, to think about our downtowns and investment, do you see that there's an ability to maybe build more capacity or to think about other legislative tweaks? I'm sorry I'm putting you on the spot, but just from where you're sitting, given all the knowledge and experience you have of managing and helping to manage some of these projects.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really hopeful that there's going to be programs put in place to create transformational change in communities in Vermont. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. We know that a priority for communities is going to be to rebuild budgets and fill those revenue shortfalls, and an acknowledgement from the state that communities have been hit really hard by COVID. Budgets have been hit really hard. And so that money that comes in, while we'd all love to say, okay, well, now you don't need TIF or you don't need these other loan funds, you can just use that money that you're getting. We also acknowledge that we know that there has been a lot of hurt from COVID on budgets, on revenue. So I think, you know, with proposals that have been put out by the administration for the capital investment program to look at what are the regional priority projects, in looking at our outdoor recreation and how do we take advantage of the increased use of outdoor recreation. We know that there will be more federal money, and I think part of what our smaller rural communities, the opportunity with S33 is to help leverage those funds. And, you know, I think our TIF districts are probably looking at how do we leverage the money that that's coming in with our TIF district designation, and smaller communities who have a real struggle creating the match, you know, to access programs like the Northern Border Regional Commission or EDA funds. This is an opportunity to create that match where they otherwise don't have that opportunity. So I think there will be some great programs, and I think it's going to be pulling all the tools together that we have to see that transformational change that our communities are looking for.
Great. Thank you so much. I am going to give everyone a last word, and I think the word or the ask I'd have of you is make your pitch and what are the biggest changes or opportunities that you see for Vermont right now, be it in regards to lessons learned from your community or from the funding that we will have coming to Vermont or S33. I think we've heard a lot of great feedback on that, which I will bring to the legislature and committee chairs to weigh in where we can. But Dom, last word from you. Where do we go from here?
Act now, put skin in the game. If the state doesn't pass it, get on with it, and you can adjust your project to the scale of your community. I think the complexity issue is a red herring. There's lots of experts out there, many of whom are on the call. So it's about stepping up and heeding the call to transform your community, or decide that you can live with it as it is.
Thanks, Dom. So many quotables there. I love it. And thanks for all the passion you bring to the topic and for bringing us here today, truly. Lori, over to you. Where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here? I think we take the models that we've already have in place and say this works well. So what's being proposed this year for TIF is no different than when we recognized that the downtown designation wasn't for every community. And then we put in place village center designations at a smaller scale in a way that we knew didn't leave out those communities that didn't have the infrastructure, the capacity within their staffing, or even more than 2 or 3 people in their government structure to be able to implement it. So I think it's all there. We have a pattern of stepping up when it's needed and to treat our communities equitably.
Thank you, Lori. Absolutely. Stephanie, last word from you.
Yes, thanks. TIF is not the magic bullet. We are talking about it in this great way, but it's not the only solution. It is one of the best tools. It has got to be used in combination, and to get us where we want to be throughout this, from this recovery or just in general, rents around the state are not super high. I mean, they are what they are. So to make this work, to make development costs are just as high as they are all over the state. And so to make those numbers work, you need all the tools on the table to be able to get out of this. And I think the 1981 plan in St. Albans, how many more communities have those? So let's try to empower those communities to be able to use all the tools they can.
I love that. Absolutely. And Megan, any final thoughts, words? Where do we go from here? You've said quite a bit already, but I will give you an opportunity.
I would, echoing what everyone has said, I think knowing what your community wants, what's right for the people there is really key. To see development work, it's got to come from the community level up. I think that's one of the great things about the TIF program, is that it really does encourage that community level up type of conversation, and would certainly love to have everyone's support for S33. And if folks have questions, the TIF is complicated. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about the program, about the application, and about our districts and the numbers that we have.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan. And I did see one last question here about how does ARP, the American Rescue Plan money, integrate with TIF? I don't think we know yet. We're actually waiting still on sort of the boundaries of the rescue plan funds, especially the funds for municipalities. But I will follow up with, if the asker of the question wants to put their information in the chat, I'm happy to follow up once we know more. I just want to take a moment before we close to thank everyone for joining us today from towns across the state. I personally am super excited about this topic, this area, and I know that all the panelists here today are as well, and that there is a lot of expertise. So I truly hope that this is a first conversation, and we'll have many more over the coming months and years as we really work to transform our rural downtowns, our rural communities, and some of our larger community and city centers, town centers across the state. So with that, thank you so much. Again, this will be available on YouTube, and I wish you all a wonderful week. Thank you.